So welcome everyone to our Food for Thought speaker series. We're glad to have all of you with us. As you may know, we've been running the Food for Thought speaker series for about a year. And we're really glad to have you all here. Our guest today is distinguished Peter McAteer, and he's going to be discussing more than climate change, why a broad definition of sustainability increases access, inclusion, and participation. If you have any questions, please keep them to the end of the session for the Q&A part. If you're not asking a question, please keep yourself on mute. You can also put questions in the chat if you aren't able to ask them directly. So now I'll hand it off to Bill to do the introduction. Thank you everyone for joining us, and thank you, Peter, for joining us.
Thank you, Jeremy. As always, you're the glue that holds this ship together. So thank you for that. And thank you to Valerie as well, who's on vacation this week in Vermont. So we're wishing her well and sending her good thoughts. I don't think it's as hot up there as it is down here. So hopefully she's out having fun. Same rules as always. Peter will run the show here. He'll speak and do whatever he's going to do, and he'll open it for questions. And if he wants to jump into the chat during that, he will. I'm really, really honored to have him here. I've known him for a long time, and his illustrious career is well and succinctly pointed out in this book, which buy this book or steal this book. It's hard to steal a book on Amazon, but if you can figure out how to do it. It's a great book. I not only have read it multiple times, I actually wrote the foreword. So if you have good eyes, you might even see my name on the cover. But Peter is someone who's worked in all three sectors at the highest levels. He's currently an entrepreneur. He's running his own sustainable learning company. He was involved, and maybe he'll talk a little bit about this, with some startups during the pandemic, dealing with the need for a global supply chain. He was formerly managing director for Harvard's business publishing organization, where he really forwarded and moved forward e-learning and digital learning at its earlier stages, if not earliest, from a commercial enterprise. I got to know him first. He was director of learning services for UNDP. And we actually went to Syria together. I haven't been back. I don't know if you had, but I'm sure if I did go back, I would be heartbroken. Among other things, we got to see some of the beautiful, beautiful ancient buildings that were, hopefully some of them are still there, but were there. He's been a faculty member here at Columbia University. He's guest lectured at universities around the world, written or co-authored numerous academic articles in a variety of journals, including the Harvard Business Review. He now lives in Bangkok, but he's currently in Florida. And during the course of the pandemic, we've talked quite frequently as he hopscotched the United States and the world, staying one step ahead of the pandemic so far, I think. And just a great person. And among other things, is really one of the experts in the world on sustainability, and a position that really dovetails with my good friend and co-author many times over, Steve Cohen, who has made the case and makes the case in this book that in fact, sustainability is not just good for the planet, it's good for business. And if you want to make more money, you should be sustainable. It has a side benefit of being good for everybody else, but it's a profit center. It's not a cost. This is not do good by making less money or compromising your shareholders. It benefits shareholders. So with that, thank you again, Peter, for coming, and it's your show. Please take over.
Thanks, and I'll just pop the share screen here. Multiple participants can share at a time. Desktop. Okay, this is not popping up right away. There we go, Zoom.
You need to
Okay,
make Peter a co-host, Jeremy.
He's already the co-host.
Okay.
and so for whatever reason, it's I assume you can't see my screen yet.
Mm-mm.
No, I can see you.
Desktop share. Okay, there we go.
There you go.
Okay, so let's just get this open. Okay, so hopefully you can see the slides,
Yes.
and there we go. Okay. So with this, and again, I'm happy if someone has questions in the middle of this to interrupt. If something needs greater explanation, happy to do it. So what I wanted to do today is really start with something fairly simple. My experience is often if even a simple topic is worth an hour of time if it's a relevant issue. And to me, in my experience over the last few years in particular, our basic problem with sustainability is we start from a perspective where we don't share a common understanding of the nature of the problem. And with that, like anything, if you don't agree on what the problem is, then it's very hard to work on solutions. And so to me, the basic observation is our progress is too slow, there's confusion going on. And a lot of this is due to what I call low knowledge maturity. Right? We're talking about a lot of things which essentially we don't know much about. Bill referenced being in Syria, and we went out to the desert to these wonderful old Assyrian ruins, which have been reconstructed in some instances. And if you're insightful, you might say, well, why the heck did they build this magnificent city out here in the middle of the desert? Well, the reality is they didn't. It used to be surrounded by trees and things. But because of a variety of reasons, we now find the Fertile Crescent includes an awful lot of desertification, and part of that is man-made, and part of that is for other reasons. But it's a useful illustration of the challenge we have here. So what I've done is I start with this premise that we're simply moving too slow. For those of you who are familiar with the IPCC report, we're going to have our 6th assessment coming out next year. They're already beginning to share drafts. The 3 working groups, I put it 4 fingers, the 3 working groups that are out doing things. There was an unauthorized release of one of the drafts recently. But it's clear that what they're going to be talking about by next year, and again, those are going to be the primary report, the synthesis report, the 3 subgroups, and 3 specialized reports, which is what come out of this. This is the 6th such report. Is they're going to say the planet has already warmed 1.1 degrees. We're never going to make our Paris climate targets. And in all likelihood, the trend is we're well on our way to 3 degrees centigrade in climate change. And if you look at the past 5 IPCC reports, the middle ground predictions have all turned out not to be true. What has turned out to be true is the more dire predictions on that scale. So I think now we are also beginning to look at the idea that these middle ground optimistic scenarios that we've been thinking about are not really happening. And in the report, they're also going to talk about these 12 tipping points that they see as things that if we hit beyond these goals, we're going to cascade. Now, what people don't see in there is that all the progress we've made on poverty reduction and hunger and things are literally at risk because of these things. And again, I look at that and I say, part of this is because people don't make the links between all of these parts of sustainability. And when I talk to people in classes, and if you read that little paper I shared ahead of time, I do a lot of surveys with people. And when most people talk about sustainability, they think climate change. That's it. They don't make the connection to COVID. They don't make the connection to poverty and hunger. They don't make a connection to increases in migration due to climate events. They don't think about peace and justice or Black Lives Matter as part of a sustainability kind of challenge. And so, I look at that and I say, we're really missing things. And if we're going to accelerate change, in my view, it takes four things operating in balance. And one is you've got to have really robust education in the corporate sector, right? Because again, you can't drive innovation down in the organization unless everyone is really operating from the same perspective. And we would never look at the definition of sustainability that floats around in organizations and feel comfortable with it. If we were talking about service or Six Sigma or Kaizen or any one of these other things that we've talked about over the last 3 or 4 decades, we always started with a much more precise definition of what we're trying to achieve. And in fact, with that, we also have this rise of nationalism and climate denial and all these other sort of things. And I hear very little conversation about the impact on small and medium-sized enterprises, which even in the United States, still accounts for something on the order of 40% of all employment. And in many countries in Southeast Asia, where I live, account for 60% or more of employment. So if you look at it that way, you say, well, you can't reach these goals without small to medium-sized enterprises, yet we're not doing anything. So first of all, you have to have a robust corporate education program. 2, you really have to focus on ecosystem development. As I did interviews for my book, one of the things that people really emphasized, who were really out front on sustainability, was that one of the constraining factors to growth and development was the fact that the rest of their ecosystem, right, all their partners and their suppliers and things, did not necessarily have alignment on the goals. And that really constrained their progress. So ecosystem development was important. 3, the better companies do a fantastic job with partnership development to fill the knowledge gaps that they don't have, right? So when you tell your supply chain department, we're going to eliminate single-use packaging, and the guy in supply chain says, well, no one ever taught me that in school, and I've been doing this for 20 years, and no one ever gave me such a crazy direction in the past. Where do I find someone who has some understanding of how to do this? So you need partners to fill in those knowledge gaps and capability gaps. And the 4th thing you need is informed public policy. And I look at all 4 of these things when I look back at corporate leadership. I say, at different levels of the organization, you've got to be working on public policy, you've got to be working on partnerships, you've got to be working on ecosystem development, and you've got to be able to translate sustainability into what does it mean for me at my level of the organization. So if I'm a bank and I'm a teller, what does sustainability mean to me? Does it mean nothing? Right? So the reason I push this is I often say to people is that sustainability is unlike any other business transformation we've ever done. If your business was focusing on Six Sigma, you got to go home and you were not forced at home to think about Six Sigma and how you're going to restock your kitchen. Right? You could leave it, but we cannot solve sustainability challenges without changes in personal behavior, right? So that's go along. So every time I talk to people in a class, I say, you get 4 votes, right? And this is part of the issue. So whatever the company is doing is one thing. And one of the votes you get is where you choose to work, right? And that's important. And then you should take your values to work and be pushing it. But you also get a vote as a citizen for who are we electing and are they supporting informed public policy? And you get a vote as a consumer. And if you don't change your personal behavior, we can talk all we want about what amount of the fisheries have been fully depleted, but if you don't change your shopping behavior, well, then we're not going to solve that problem. And you also get a vote as an investor. And as I illustrated in my surveys, very few people acknowledge that they do anything or think about sustainability when it comes to their 401k retirement accounts or anything else like that. It's really not a top of mind kind of issue. But my argument is if you're going to have a company that really is a market leader on sustainability, you've got to engage everyone, hearts and minds. You've got to engage them at a personal level. And if you can do that, you start seeing things that you wouldn't otherwise see. So on this image here, this is a picture I took a few weeks back when I was in Thailand. And because I'm involved in PPE development, I invested my retirement savings in a couple of businesses because I thought that was a market that needed some attention. And I started noticing, and you have to look here in the picture, you can see bottle caps and straws and things. Part of what the observation is here is when the economy was better, all of the major hotels came out and cleaned their beaches in the morning. All right, so tourists didn't see the plastic washing up on the beach. Now, when I talked to the hotel owner here, one of the major resorts, asked him what was his occupancy during the week. He said 10%. And on the weekends, maybe it went up to 20%. Right? That's an unsustainable hotel, right, over time. You can't have occupancy rates of 10, 15%. But what I also see here is all these little rubber bands. Now, because I'm in the rubber business, I notice this, right? And this is, again, a metaphor for people in your organization. If they are not looking for something, if they're not aware of their involvement in something, they're not going to see things that are staring them in the face. So I went up and bought, I call it a clam rake, but essentially it was only little plastic buckets that they sell to kids. And I dug down 6 inches in a square meter space, and I found lots of other rubber bands there. Now, if you've ever been in developing markets, when you often go out to a stall, they'll give you food in a little plastic bag and they put a little rubber band around the top. And so lo and behold, what do you see? You see dozens of rubber bands. And when I dug down 6 inches across it, I found dozens more rubber bands. So all of this stuff which is getting out in the environment, and as someone in the rubber business, I realized if that's made of nitrile rubber, that will never degrade. If it's made of pure latex rubber, original leather, yes, it will degrade in about 20 years, right? So people are doing lots of things and unconsciously throwing out a rubber band. It's just a rubber band. But what you see here is at the high tide line, it's just a small fraction of what's going out beyond that. And I did a workshop a while ago in California, and I try to use things that are in plain sight that people don't see as a way of getting them to acknowledge that they can do more about this. And so I did a case study a week or so about the kelp forests off the California coast, a large bulb kelp forest, which if you've ever seen these things, these grassy plants that grow to be 20 feet long in the water and are the home for all sorts of small crustaceans and fish. Well, along the California coast in many areas, they've lost 80% of their bulb kelp forests, right, to changes in salinity and changes in pollution and things. If the loss of those things were on land, it would be the same as California losing all of its redwood forests. Now, if California lost all of its redwood forests, we'd be up in arms. Oh my God, this is a disaster. But because it's under the water, we don't see it. Yet, these problems persist. And if you can acknowledge a series of these problems, all of a sudden you begin to say, wow, I really have to do something about this. This is horrible. So there are these things that surround everyone, that we go about our daily life and we just sort of ignore it. So I really like to bring these things forward because I think, again, if you're going to win hearts and minds, you've got to bring this back to people's personal life and allow them to make a personal connection with this. Now, the problem with this, to me, starts with our Sustainable Development Goals. And I was at the UN when we had our Millennium Development Goals, and there were only 8 of them. And I found them hard to understand. And that's probably my limitation. Once I get beyond my 5 fingers, I begin to draw a blank on what was that 6th or 7th one. But the SDGs, and this is in the center of the screen here, right? The 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, focuses on 5 different thematic areas: people, planet, prosperity, peace, and partnership. Although if you go out and see your posters on the SDGs, you won't see those themes anywhere. They disappear and all you see are 17 goals. And of course, below that are 169 submeasures. And I'll guarantee you, the vast majority of people cannot tell you what the 17 goals are. And they absolutely can't tell you what the 169 submeasures are. Most of the goals have somewhere between 8 and 13 measures, except for goal number 17, which is about sharing, which has 20 submeasures. Now, if you go all the way on the left, I always start with the simplest idea of people, planet, profit, or community, environment, economy, whatever words people want to use, doesn't really matter. They get back to the same thing. The UN tried, and this predates the Sustainable Development Goals. It goes back several decades when we were doing the Millennium Development Goals. They created something called the UN Global Compact. And most major companies subscribe to this and they write reports about this. But as you notice, the themes they have there, right, human rights, labor, anti-corruption, the environment, don't match the 5 themes under the 2030 Agenda. And of course, those relate to 10 principles. And a lot of those principles have links back to UN declarations about labor or anti-corruption. And again, I'll guarantee you the vast majority of people have never read those declarations, even in their companies who are members of the UN Global Compact. Now, on the right, you start seeing organizations trying to simplify things. So in Europe, they have something called GAP frame. And they start talking about society, planet, economy, and governance. And they've translated the 17 goals actually into 24 goals, which when you think of that, you say, I'm not sure that's improving the simplification process. But their argument is a number of the goals, sustainable consumption and production, are really two things. Right? That's not one goal, that's two goals. And they also say you're missing some things like public finance, business integrity, employment. And so they've expanded to 24 goals, but then shrank down the measures to 68 measures. You have things like certified B corporations, which most people I speak to really use it as sort of a benchmarking framework. And that's useful, but it also constrains you into what that is. And now, of course, they use workers, customers, community, environment, and government. So they use different words. And my point in all this is a demonstration of low knowledge maturity. We really don't have a good grip on this because we haven't found something yet that clearly articulates the problem in ways that people can internalize this and make use of it. And the real challenge in a business is I can be a member of the UN Global Compact, and I can say I support the SDGs, but translating that down into the organization is missing. And I've assessed organizations around the world on this, and I use a very simple model, 5 stages, and I say, first, I'm looking for evidence of intent. Are you trying to do this? Okay. Then I say, is there evidence of action in place, at least in some work team in the organization? And I say, okay, I can generally find that, right? But generally I find that in the ESG department or something like that, or with the chief sustainability officer or with the project. And then I say, fine, can I see evidence of intent organizationally? Or can I see evidence of organizational action on a recurring basis? Or finally, can I see that, and now I can see the changes cross-functionally in your policies and procedures? And I tell you where you rank, and almost everybody ranks back at level 2. And if you have level 3, it's generally you're not a multi-business line organization, right? And I'll admit that it's very hard, which is why you don't see benefit corporations at large multinationals, because your reporting would have to go by business line, by geography line. It's a massive amount of reporting to do. So if you're Johnson & Johnson and you have 300 different business units, right, as well as corporate functions and shared service organizations, that's a lot of coordination, acknowledged, right? But to me, the fundamental problem with engagement, it's hard to engage people unless you can talk a common language and say, this is the problem we're chasing, this is how it affects your life, and this is what I would like you to do differently in your job tomorrow. And around these kind of things is where I want you to innovate. And to me, it is the rare organization that now says, executives, I want you to focus on business models and social value creation and organizational structure and business brand. And down in technology, I want you to focus on enabling technology and certain processes and expanding the information network. We don't get precise about what we can do in the organization, and therefore we sub-optimize the issue. Anyway, so this to me is part of the confusion with engagement. So what I've done here is I've put up a little model, and this is sort of my last of the process sort of ideas. And after this, I just want to go through a couple of illustrations of different examples. So I give people a 4-step model, and this is where I think most people go. The right side of the model, which is where people are in a compliance stage, which is really tell me what to do and I'll do it. You change the law, okay, I'll adapt to that law. So McDonald's in India, in certain places, they say no beef burgers. All right, they don't sell beef burgers. In parts of Thailand, you're not allowed to use that foam packaging. They've outlawed that. All right, somehow they figure out how to adapt and they don't use the foam packaging anymore. So you can see people will comply when told what to do. And that is where the vast majority of companies still are. The second one is efficiency. And efficiency is interesting because very often, I'm sorry. Okay, I thought I heard a question, but efficiency is where it's easy to push companies because this is where you save money. And what I've organized in my research is this comes down to 7 things. And everybody does these 7 things. So they work on energy efficiency. They work on waste reduction. They work on various material efficiency and how to build a product with a little less material. They work on packaging optimization. They work on transportation efficiency. They work on recycling, and they work on remanufacturing. That's it. That's what everybody does in that space. And the positive thing is you can sit there and talk to people about recycling or packaging optimization, and you can show them, I can show you how to save 10, 15%. This is a no-brainer. You really don't have to believe in sustainability to buy that argument, because good, that drops to the bottom line. Fantastic, we can do that. It also allows you to put in your ESG reports that you're doing something. The problem with that right side of the model is it doesn't require you to fundamentally change your business at all. Right? So if your business basically has a large carbon footprint, you can still have a large carbon footprint and make claims for reducing your packaging costs by 10% or reducing some of your transport costs by 10%. That's all good, except I find that people who get stuck in the efficiency phase get stuck there because the rest of the organization heard the big speech, but are not required to change anything. So therefore it's out of sight, out of mind. And even though you've been working on this for 3 years, most of your organization have not. Nothing's changed. So that it's nice, but we haven't really changed. The move
Peter,
to the left.
Would you call that greenwashing?
Well, I think it leads to greenwashing.
Okay.
Because once you've done all the low-hanging fruit, right? Now the tendency is, because you're stuck on the right side, you haven't fundamentally changed your business. And all of the skills reside in a few small areas, right? For the people who are working on this efficiency. And if you've already driven down your material cost by 50%, it's not logical to say you can keep doing this every year. You've achieved most of the easy efficiency, yet there's a push to say, publish this year that I've done 10% more. And what people often do is the same thing they've always done, is I outsource that problem. Now I'm able to say, within my walls, I have reduced something. But in terms of the planet, I've achieved nothing, right? Because I've simply outsourced that to someone else, and now they're dealing with the waste stream, or they're dealing with the other issues. So we still see a lot of that. And yes, I would call that greenwashing. Either that, or I make statements such as, Shell Oil was just forced by the Dutch government to change their plans because they fundamentally said, what they're doing is insufficient when balanced against the public health issues that are at play here. And so, yes, although they produced very, very nice reports, they were still fundamentally an oil company that was increasing revenue from oil and gas, and they did not count in a variety of things. Now, again, you see that in the arguments at the UN of where do I count the emissions, right? At the production end or the consumption end? So all the producers want it counted at the consumption end, and all the consumers want it counted at the production end, because then they don't have to change their behavior. Someone else has to change their behavior. So moving over to the responsible side, right, where you really have to be a bit of a believer, you have to change your business, and that requires more risk. So to me, the smart company goes into the efficiency stage saying, I'm not just trying to drive efficiency, but I'm trying to produce the social and political capital that's going to allow me to take greater risk in stage 3. All right, because no CEO wants to get fired. So you still want to be doing things, and if for 3 or 4 years you've been driving better bottom line results, now you have an opportunity. And you can see very good examples like a Unilever, which under Paul Pullman, and he's now retired now, but that transition for him took a 15-year process so far. But now he's able to say, more than 50% of my growth comes from my sustainable brands. Now everyone can see that, and it's easy to say, great, let's do that. But in the early stage, to be honest, he was saved a little bit because all of his competitors, their stocks were depressed, particularly following the crash of 2007, 2008. So he got a reprieve that allowed him to keep focusing on this, because at least in terms of his competitive peers, he was looking okay. But it took 4 years for those sustainable brands to really start affecting the bottom line in a positive way. Other than that, it was just a cost. And that's the problem with a lot of these transitions. We can cite, companies like Tesla and a lot of other companies are doing it, and Virgin's doing something, and Mahindra in India is doing something. But the fault with all of those examples are these are companies where the majority shareholder controls the business, and you can't fire these people. All right, so that's not the good example. The real example you need is show me a company where a CEO could lose their job who's taking a bold risk. And there's just too few of them. And a lot of that comes because we don't have the public policy to support these people in many ways. At least that's my opinion. And then finally, people who really get a strategic advantage out of this, the unique competitive positioning, those are harder to find. And a lot of that is unique and different. Now, around this model is where you play with people and you start saying, I can change you from a stage 3 model to a stage 2 model just by changing the perspective we take for a moment. Are you counting in your scope 1, scope 2 materials that you're bringing into your company? Oh, you're not. Okay. Are you counting in the activity of your tier 1 and tier 2 suppliers? Oh, you're not. Okay. Well, then that's a big difference. The people at Levi's did a great look at water resources involved in a pair of jeans. And when they looked at their own company, right, they had this wonderful analysis of how they were going to reduce water. Then they took a circular economy perspective and they looked at, beginning to end, and they discovered that their company was only responsible for 5% of the water usage. 45% came from the growers, the producing of the jeans, the dyeing of the jeans, the making them look washed, and the behavior of consumers who wash these jeans every week. So all of a sudden, when that dawns on you, you say, well, you know what? I thought I was a strategic company here. The reality is I'm nowhere near strategic because I'm doing nothing about 95% of the water use as it is reflected in my product. So that's where, as you use different business models and educationally, when I start talking to people about decarbonization or degrowth or decoupled growth or natural capital or clean capitalism, what the heck does that mean? Or green capitalism or green growth, shared value creation, benefit corporations, what do these things mean? And how does that change the behavior in your company? And how does that change your processes? And how does it change your benchmarking? And how does it change your scorecards? And that's really where, to me, the light bulbs start going off. And people start saying, wow, we really should do something different here. Okay, got it. I see the problem. You're right. And it's a rare company like a Patagonia out in California that says, yes, we will audit our tier 2 suppliers to make sure no one is using migrant workers and that everyone is being treated fair. And we have a series of checklists in each of our businesses which ask them to answer questions. So when you design a product at Patagonia, they ask very specifically, can this be deconstructed so I can take the component parts and recycle them? And that leads them to not use certain glues in things and leads them to sewing things. It's also led them to make money by accepting back used products that they recondition, and now they sell used products on their site. It led Levi's to putting bins in the stores where they'll take back jeans from any manufacturer because they realize that actually recycling jeans, you get a lot of cheap cotton, which is no different than the original virgin cotton, and it costs half as much. And this is really where companies start saying, you're right, by having a circular economy perspective and driving that down in my organization, I'm actually making more money. This is good. And I can really talk about things other than those 7 that I used to talk about, that the guy in the retail store, the retail clerk can do something about. Right? They can make sure that bin is full. They can talk to people. We can educate our consumers about how often should you wash your jeans. And all of a sudden they have a dirty jeans campaign going on. Don't wash your jeans. So in that instance, I'm way ahead of the game. I never washed my jeans very much, so I figure I'm a trendsetter on that sort of thing. But these 4 models, it just becomes a useful way. And to me, 17-step models don't work. You've got to narrow this down to something that everyone can remember and say, we're here, I want to be here. What are the things that I need to focus on that I can do something about? Is in the organization empowering me to do something about that? Okay, so I'm going to go quickly through the rest because I'm using up too much of the time here. So I use a basic process for every level of the organization, and I go through. And on the upper left-hand side of the model, I said, so what's the foundation knowledge regarding the things that you can do something about? Okay, so if you're working on process improvement in your area, what's the foundation knowledge on the upper left, right? What's the known information that's really good? And even if you're working on reuse or product optimization, what do we know about that space that we can learn? Okay, On the right-hand side, on the upper right, I'm trying to get everybody focused on, we need to develop new heuristics, right? So we got to get those new rules of thumb that everyone is discovering. And we need a process in place to capture this new knowledge in our organization, because ultimately we want to be in a position of having competitive advantage. So we need to figure out this stuff for ourselves, and the rubber meets the road at every individual work group. In the bottom left, I'm talking to the human resource group and the leaders about, we need to start creating new social rituals in this organization, right, that incorporate this new mindset. And on the bottom right, I said, we ultimately have to change our thinking. So if we want to adopt green capitalism, that's cool. Let's figure out what that means to you. And let's drive that down and say, what does that mean for day-to-day decision-making in the organization? All right, let's start working on our processes and things, because it's that day-to-day decision-making which is going to give me, over the course of the year, that 200 touch points that allow me to really reinforce a new set of behaviors. Right? It's not going to be the proclamation from the CEO. It's going to be day-to-day problem solving. And I got to figure out, am I asking people to think differently? And if so, how? And that's where I said it very often depends on the business unit. So we go back to the basics. You organize by business units, you organize by functions, you organize by geographies, and you try to adapt this model to everyone there. So quickly, a couple of ideas. It's a wonderful little seed company I work with in Thailand, all about smallholder farmers, farmers all over sub-Saharan Africa, Latin America, basically in equatorial areas, generally farm plots of no more than 2 acres. Right? A significant percentage of the food in the world is grown by these little farmers. And so by driving this down in the organization, what you find is you've got the research department working on climate adapted seeds. You've got people out in the field working with their farmers, taking pictures of what does it mean to you to be a more responsible farmer. And very often they're taking pictures that say, the responsible farmer, look, he's got a new truck. And oh, by the way, he's able to send his daughter to school. And to me, that's a translation, right? The SDGs mean nothing at that point. What means something is, I can do something good for the planet. This person fundamentally wants to do something good. I've got a program where we can join on that and build a relationship around that. They created something called the Seedsmanship Academy, which I would be the first to admit, when I was drafting up the content for the Seedsmanship Academy, I had no clue. But wonderful people there, and it was just a question of teasing out that knowledge for that. They do a fantastic program on knowledge transfer with farmers, where smarter farmers are good for business. They run innovation tournaments, so they decided to get non-farmers, like college students in IT, to work with farmers on farmer problems. And they have these tournaments, and they give awards, and they give business grants to people who do these sort of things. And they also do a future farmer program, because they realize that most farmers in developing markets are 56 years old, and not enough young people are going into this. So they realize, in order to solve the food crisis, which is coming, when you move from 7.5 billion people to 9.5 billion people by 2050, in the face of climate change and everything else, you're going to have to really build up this population and enable them to do great things. So again, company, these guys really embrace it. And the nice thing about this company, it's only a 3,000 person company spread over 22 countries. So that's a small business that's really doing something great. Galaxy Entertainment, one of the biggest casinos in the world, which I work with out in Macau. I haven't worked with them in the last couple of years before that I did, but I was always proud with some of the things they were able to do. And one of the great things they were able to do was, they said in their talent development program, we will now require it as a rite of passage that you must sit on one of our 6 green committees. And if you do not, you will not get promoted. And they look at that very seriously, or at least they did when I was still sitting on the talent committee, and this is now 2 years I'm removed from that. And they would start coming up with lots of things. And they also committed to training all of their vendors. So they don't get rid of a vendor who doesn't comply. They commit to a 2-year training cycle where we're going to get you on board. So they really take that issue of getting my supply chain into place. They also introduced the Clean Plate Initiative, which is actually part of a Chinese government initiative, where I got the workers in the cafeterias. It used to be free food for everybody. And generally when things are free, they pile their plates high with food, but they had massive waste. So now they introduced a different program where it's called a Clean Plate Initiative. You can take anything you want, but you don't throw anything out. And everything that gets thrown out will be recyclable. And the people in the cafeteria really get into it. They really found this to be an exciting sort of program. We also got them to donate some of the land, which you can't see in this picture. It's actually to the left of the highway here. to local cultural initiatives to preserve what it means to have a Macanese culture. And so that land, which is very expensive in Macau, is now dedicated only to small businesses, and they underwrite the rents and everything, who preserve Macanese society. And so they felt, okay, we're losing part of our culture by turning everything into an entertainment district. Again, another one, this is my company, KPPM Global. KPPM stands for Chris, which is my wife's name, Peter, my name, Poom, which is the nickname of our Thai son, and M for Macateer. The bottom picture is our factory under development. The top one is an artist's rendition. But I always like the idea, if I'm going to talk to people about things, that I can actually do it myself. I always find it funny that too many people talk about things, yet they've never have done it in their own real life. So this is my retirement savings at work, and I'm trying to solve the problem of nitrile gloves. Right? So nitrile gloves, the rubber, which is used for PPE, over the last year with the COVID pandemic, we've thrown away another, I believe it's 2 billion gloves, more than we would have pre-pandemic. Nitrile gloves are known as those nice blue gloves, which generally is the color people see. And they're more resistant to puncture, they're more resistant to chemicals, they are less prone to allergies. And we achieved that by pulling out the latex proteins. Now, latex, natural rubber, if you get a latex glove, you throw it in the garbage, it generally degrades within 2 decades. Same as if a rubber tree falls in the forest, it'll naturally degrade into its constituent parts. Nitrile is so strong that it resists photo degradation. So if you left it on the beach, all 2 billion extra gloves, it would start to degrade, but the photo degradation would take on the order of 100 years. And that's an estimate, since no one has ever sat around and waited the 100 years to actually see that. And if it's buried in the ground, it resists microbial degradation. So in essence, every one of these gloves we are throwing away now will be there in essence forever, right? And as we now become more pandemic sensitive, it's important to remember those masks that we put on, not cloth masks, because the cloth will degrade, but all the graded masks in the United States are graded on 1 of 3 levels, and they're all made of synthetic materials. Right? And a lot of those synthetic materials, generally called hot blown plastics, are great as filters, but they do not degrade on a rapid basis. And since Bill, I know you're a former fire department guy, the first test with all these things is they have to meet fire retardant level 1. They cannot burst into flames. So they can melt, but they can't degrade in that. And so we're now throwing away billions of masks and billions of gloves. So by solving COVID problems, we are now introducing a whole new set of waste stream problems. My team, I have to say, has been extraordinary. What we've done is we've designed the roof of the building now to have solar panels to power the building. We have a water recapture system that now drains everything, and this is our pond behind the building. And the team has really embraced this, and they have come up with all kinds of crazy different things. We discovered that the dirt we dug out was quite valuable in Bangkok. It was a very low-lying thing. And so they did a big donation program of dirt to temples and schools, which I had nothing to do with. I had no idea that temples needed dirt. We become very popular with the local Buddhist monks and things. And it's really made us a real part of the community. They decided to do a food security program. And so one of the people, I was looking at our invoices, and I noticed we had bought 25,000 eggs. And of course, I called someone to say, why are we buying 25,000 eggs? And someone came up with the idea that with all the hotels closed, that there were too many of these perishables. So we bought a whole bunch of eggs, and we decided to do a food giveaway, which was a breakfast for all the Thai people. And then they called up the local police department. The police were happy to do it. We gave the police gloves and things. And because they are a community-based culture, as you see in these top 2 pictures, there's my picture. Standing there on the left side, on the right side, I had me in a nice one in a suit with my wife. So they did not want to do this without giving me credit as part of the team. So I found that really funny, but it's where the cultural elements are something to use as an advantage, not. So to me, the rise of nationalism is something we have to face, but we can use it. All the 5 major monotheistic religions in the world are all supportive of sustainability. Yet in a corporate environment, we don't like to use religion. That almost seems like a bad kind of idea. Yet there are fantastic traditions there that people embrace. And again, if your goal is hearts and minds, that is something you can use quite effectively. So this allows these guys, and this is driven now 100% by the teams on the ground. And this is my last slide. And this is a funny one. This is my wife on the right of this billboard. A series of women executives in Thailand decided to run a Miss Earth contest. And the contest was only open to female executives because it's largely a male-dominated culture. And so the women decided they were going to do something on sustainability. And the contest, which is euphemistically patterned after the idea of a Miss Universe kind of thing, requires them to go onto public service messages and to communicate to the public why they should change their behavior. And so Chris is out there giving public messages about the atmosphere and the importance of that. So in essence, we have competing things, and then they're going to have what is effectively a reality TV show where everyone gets to vote on which messages were the most powerful, which messages did they resonate with, and did they take any action as because of that. And to me, I never even would have thought of this. But the fact that everyone, including my wife, have now really embraced this idea and the definition in ways that it means something to them, I think we're making a heck of a lot more progress on this. So that's sort of my end, and I've unfortunately taken up a lot of the time. But that's basically my point, right? You start with those four things, let's say ecosystem, public policy, partnerships, and education. The one where everyone has to start is education in a corporate environment. The simple model that allows you to say, where are you on the progress side and what are the activities that relate to this, is something that everyone can remember. And I think you drive a lot more progress when you have that clarity. So anyway, thank you for listening to that little speech. And if there are any other questions, I'm happy to answer or respond to anyone. So I'll turn this back over to you, Bill.
So actually, I'll turn it over to Jeremy. But before I turn it over to Jeremy, I'm going to take my opening here to say, do you see out there in what I would call the PQM revolution, where there was, in my view, Toyota, who embraced it 1000% and became a world leader, the world leader, maybe still the world leader. Are there one or two companies out there that you would see as the next generation of leading the sustainability movement, the true sustainability movement, that are closer to that, who maybe people 20 years from now will look back and say they were the Toyota of this movement?
Well, I think among large companies, I would be reluctant to give anyone too much credit at the moment. So there are definitely, and then you have to give credit to a Ford Motor Company for taking the initiative to convert over. Basically, they've had to take out $20 billion in new capital to finance this conversion. But I think we need to wait a little while to see that. And the examples I've used, whether it's the casino business or whatever, I think we really have to say the only way this happens is you have to look industry sector by industry sector. So you could say, Louis Vuitton, Moet Hennessy has been doing some really good things over the years, but I don't want to give them too much credit because I think they have a long way to go. There's tons of small companies out there. The question is whether they're doing, and I list a bunch of them in my book. It's hard to say whether what they do there can scale. All right, so the problem with the TQM kind of thing is as I said, I haven't seen a company where there's any data that says the employees in my business, when they go home, embrace this equally well and really take this to heart and are doing something, because that's half the equation. If you only do it at work and you're at home, you're still, a simple example, carbon footprint, United States, right? The world averages something like 5 gigatons per person. The European Union's about 6.7. We need to be at about 3, and the US is at about 15.7, right? And that's an average for everybody. And that average includes all the little babies and the old people. So when you actually do surveys with people, you discover their carbon footprints is really more like 50 gigatons or 60 gigatons. That's a lot. And that requires them to change the behavior because they're the ones which are driving that average up. It's not the little baby that's doing it, or it's not the old person that's doing it. It's the working people at a major US corporation. That's it. And my key when I go to see them is I say, so that flight you take from San Francisco to Paris, business class, costs what? What does it cost you to buy a carbon offset credit for your $3,500 ticket? Do you know? And I do surveys with this with all the companies. Everybody gets it wrong. You know, maybe a quarter get right, and they're probably guessing because I'm giving them multiple choice, and so it's probably that. But the fact that it might cost 15 bucks, and then you say to them, you're trying to tell me your company's willing to spend $3,500, but they're not willing to spend $3,515, that somehow that would change your behavior, and you're not willing to buy a carbon offset credit? I think that's to paraphrase, I'll paraphrase Bill Barr, that's BS. Tie that to current events. Anyway, that's my answer to that one.
Okay, good. And just to follow up for a second. So Ford, because of the electric truck?
Yeah, it's not just the truck, is that they're committing to a rollover of their things. A better example would be Mahindra and Mahindra in India, right? Mahindra and Mahindra, Aman Mahindra, the CEO, did require, and I worked with their supply chain department, did require them to get rid of all single-use packaging. But that became an absolute crazy time because people are starting to say, well, we have 100,000 parts we take in. So I have to, nobody can send me anything with single-use packaging. So now they're sending me reusable packaging. Well, who's responsible for all the stupid packaging? Where am I going to put it? I mean, am I going to buy this? Am I going to finance this? And you start getting into all these questions that no one has a clue how to answer. But it did require, and again, but this is the exception. It says, this is the guy with his name on the company to say, we're going to do this, no exceptions, get it done. And I applaud them for that. But still, fundamentally, they make diesel and gasoline powered engines, and they are going to have to take 20 years to get out of that business. And so I'm reluctant to give them too much credit, but again, I think they're individually within certain functions and behaviors, they're doing some good things.
Thank you.
I think everybody has to be a little bit of a slap back. Don't give them too much credit. No. One pat on the back, one slap on the face, and say, go back to work. We got a lot more to get done.
Peter?
Go ahead.
Hi, it's Ellie Amber here. You brought up Paul Pullman's name.
Yep.
Who set in motion a lot of things that Unilever is still doing. I a number of months ago wrote a post for Forbes.com about Unilever's sustainability responsibilities. And Alan Yope, the successor to Paul Pullman, is carrying on quite nicely. Thank you very much. But Pullman, in a landmark speech in Washington in 2015 at the annual awards, Heineken on the Hill, he made a couple of very interesting statements about the genesis of what Unilever is trying to do and how he's carrying it forward. He pointed to two problems, two challenges, as he called them. Number one is man versus nature. It's simply that we are using more than we can grow. The second one is short-termism. And he clearly pointed at the fact that a lot of short-termism on the part of corporations, the pressure for that is being brought on by the corporation's boards themselves.
Correct.
Would you comment on that?
Well, I work with a group out in California, Climate Advisors, which is specifically trying to work with boards. Boards are way behind on things. And you know, the problem with boards is the average board member is generally a white male, 60-something years old. I mean, I forget the exact stats on it, particularly for large corporations. And most of these people don't have a lot of experience with sustainability issues. And the ability of boards to form partnerships to bring in new knowledge is really lacking. And many consulting firms, the big consulting firms, all had ESG things, but you also notice that a lot of the large consulting firms have shrank back those consulting practices because there's just not demand for it. So we've got this resistance among certain board groups to acquiring new knowledge, and it's really shareholders which are beginning to drive some of that change. So we've seen shareholder initiatives in the United States at Exxon as an example, where shareholders representing less than 1% of the outstanding shares have gotten positions on the boards to drive a stronger ESG and to get board members in there who can respond to that. So there is a lot of that. And short-termism is, again, where you need public policy to change about this. As long as everyone's focused on quarterly reports and annual reports, that's a basic problem. And that was one of the problems that the benefit corporation is designed to change, right? So 32 US states and 2 US territories allow a benefit corporation status, which says you must report on your social value creation, just along with the rest of your financial things, and not in the separate report that no one reads, but in your basic financial statements. So that's, you call it a baby step towards improving that. It's, it's really not the answer. And in many ways, European regulators are well ahead of the United States on that. So I think, unfortunately, this is, again, a situation where we just have a lot more to go. And part of the problem is board members have not internalized this as their responsibility to drive change, and therefore they are not doing it, and they're putting a lot of window dressing on things. So I'm very disappointed in large company boards in particular. So anyway, but I agree. I've seen Paul's statement on that. And the fact is, Paul was only brought in as an outsider because the company was already in crisis. Without that, they probably never would have brought Paul in as an outsider, because the tradition at Unilever was always to promote from within. So he was the anomaly at Unilever to come in.
He did bring with him the concept of products with a purpose.
Correct.
And tie the development and the projected profit of any product with one of the global goals, basically millennial goals.
Yeah. Well, you, in many ways, when I look at knowledge, right, the groups that are lagging is the whole finance community and the CPA community and all these other industry organizations. They are not pushing the evolution of standards in their part of the world to incorporate these new ideas. So people aren't being trained differently. People are not responding differently. They're not writing the reports differently. The discussions are not really different, with the exception of a small group of people who are taking a leadership position like Paul Pullman or some of these entrepreneurs who are out there. But I look at all those and say that's the exception to the rule. That is not the standard in the world at the moment, which means we're not making enough progress, despite the fact that you can look at a company like them and say, they're making more money at this. This is not charity. They're doing better. And in fact, if you allowed them to change the way they look at their books to a more progressive view over a 3 to 5 year period of time, you would see that they're actually making a higher return on investment than they would otherwise. So there's a lot of benefit to doing that, except that, you got to get public policy on board with this, and public policy is lagging. So anyway, thanks for the comment. But there's good stuff there, but we're just not making the progress we need to achieve that.
Right. Bill, you're on mute.
I hate to be a killjoy, but we're pretty strict about our limit. That's how we have continued to function for almost 50 of these so far. So Peter, that was fabulous, really fabulous, and definitely food for thought for all of us. So thank you so much. Jeremy,
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Peter.
Well, I was going to say, as I was listening, I can see that there were also some comments in the chat session. So my apologies for not responding to everyone on there in the time allowed, but I enjoyed talking to you.
But if
Jeremy?
Go ahead, Jeremy.
Just say thank you so much, Peter. As Bill said, it was a great session of food for thought. And we're glad you have this, you're bringing this to us. And we hope to see you soon.
Buy his book, buy the book.
And buy the book. Exactly.
All right, guys. Take care.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. See you next week.